Okay, we are going to talk about sustainable design. So, sustainable landscape design, a process of creating an outdoor environment that is capable of enduring over time in a self-sufficient manner with minimal expense of energy and maintenance. So there's many different definitions for sustainable landscape design. This is just one of them. So other terms that you will hear are designing with nature, green design, environmentally sensitive design, low impact design, and there's many other terms that can be used. These are just a few examples. So to accomplish this, the sustainable residential site should fit the regional context, have minimal site impact, restore damaged sites, synchronize with natural events and cycles, reuse and recycle, and create a healthy environment. So we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail. So first we'll talk about regional fit. So the principle behind regional fit is the residential site should conform to the regional context, meaning the regional climate, regional materials, and regional style. Every location has its own unique ecology, established by the interactions of the climate, topography, geology, soil, vegetation, and fauna. So I always think it's really important for our designs to fit regionally, like whether it's in a natural area like these pictures, or even if it's in a neighborhood. I think taking in that context of the surrounding environment is really, really important when you're thinking about design. So regional climate fit. So how your design is going to be affected by the temperature, the amount of precipitation, the wind, the sun, and available water. So thinking about your outdoor spaces, where they're going to be placed, all those things are going to be affected by the regional climate of your site and the area. So also thinking about regional materials. So using local materials. So using local materials can create visual harmony with the surrounding environment. So the color, the texture, and the composition will fit the local material palette. It also minimizes transportation expenses, resulting in cheaper materials, less use of fossil fuels, can benefit the local economy. Also using native plants, so there's many benefits of using native plants. So low water, attract native insects and birds, grow good here, no need for pesticides and fertilizers. You know, I always like to use the example of the client who wants a tropical landscape in Santa Cruz. And, you know, I always tell them, you know, you're going to have to work a lot harder to have a tropical landscape here versus having a plant that's more, or having a yard that's more of a Mediterranean feel. So, you know, they're going to have to be probably replanting stuff because stuff might die in the frost. It might need more fertilizers. You know, they could get more insects because they don't really, not all tropicals like to grow here, so they might attract different pests. So, you know, whereas using plants that are either native or from other areas with a similar Mediterranean climate, they're going to require less maintenance and less work. It's always good to try and encourage your clients to use local materials. So, you know, your client will go to probably like Central Home Landscape Supply or Aptos Landscape Supply. And, you know, they're going to have stone and materials that are from all over the United States and some that are shipped from all over the world. A lot of the stones come from India. And so it's always good to encourage your clients to use local materials. And we have a lot of local materials in California. So these rocks you see here, the Sonoma Field stone. So those are pretty common. You see those in the foothills. Another good thing about them is they're field stones, so they're like on the top of the ground, so they don't require like a quarry to get them or mining, so that's always a good thing. We do also have a lot of other local rocks like the Willow Creek and some different granite ones, if your client doesn't like the Sonoma Fieldstone. Decomposed granite, that's local. A lot of the Cal Gold gravels are local. We have a few local quarries here. We have one up Old San Jose Road, and then there's also one in Felton, and there's a few other ones. So, and some of the pea gravels are also can be local as well. But, things like the Mexican La Paz pebbles and the Salmon Bay, so like a lot of the really nice smooth gravels, those are not from here. So it's just something, you want to talk to your clients about, trying to use products that, are more local versus, being shipped all the way from India. Also using plants that come from local plant nurseries, I think is always good for multiple reasons, kind of supporting workers in our local community. Also, a lot of times plants that are grown in this area, once you go to plant them, are going to do better because they're used to this climate, versus, some plants, a lot of them are grown in greenhouses, and then they just bring them outside and then you put them in the ground, and maybe they're not used to being in direct sunlight, and so they might not do as well. So also, there's not as much fossil fuel transporting them from far away. And the great thing about our area is we have so many great plant nurseries. We're really fortunate, so there's really no reason to be buying plants from somewhere else outside of the county. Some other sustainable materials, so using local woods, versus using like ipe, which is a hardwood that's harvested in Brazil. So using redwood, which is very common here. Urbanite, that's concrete that's been broken apart, so a lot of times people get rid of their old concrete and you can actually reuse it. Here's some examples of like retaining walls that are built with urbanite. Adobe is always super cool. Using big timbers, Trex, and a lot of the composite decking are actually, a lot of those are from recycled products, like recycled, I think, plastics and different things. But I want to say Trex is about 95% recycled material, so sometimes those can be good to use. And then just finding used products. So it's always good to recycle, and a lot of times you can find used products, whether it's online or from contractors, so bricks, pavers, wood, etc. Minimizing site impact. So that's always really important. So the principle is the residential site design should have minimal impact on the existing site. Protect unique geological formations, minimize grading, protect existing trees, and preserve natural drainage formations. So this is all really important stuff. So obviously this image on the left is not minimizing site impact. It looks like they're taking a huge chunk out of the side of that hill to level a house pad. So when possible and you need to do grading, you always want to try and do cut and fill. So that's taking part of the earth and then using that soil to fill the rest, to fill this lower part, so you have a level area. So cut and fill is always better than just 100% cut or 100% fill. I just like this picture because I think it's just so beautiful, and it shows just a really nice pathway. It looks like in Carmel, with the Monterey cypress and some native grasses. So really utilizing the landscape there and the natural plants and the native plants. Preserving existing vegetation is always really important. So always retain as much existing vegetation whenever possible. So there's many benefits to doing this. It maintains soil stability, retains soil moisture, cools the site in the summer, reduces the visual impact, removes carbon dioxide and dust, increases oxygen, habitat for animals, visually looks better, and removal can lead to increased runoff and erosion, wind and hotter temperatures. And if your client has a tree that they hate or don't like and they're debating getting rid of it, I always try and encourage people to get it trimmed properly before removing it. Because a lot of times trees just need like a nice prune job and then they're going to look a lot better. So if a client, wants to remove a tree, but they're kind of on the fence, I always encourage them to get it pruned before they remove it. Because once you remove all that vegetation, you're left with an image like this, and it's pretty ugly, lacks privacy, and it takes a long time for trees to grow. And plants also, some plants are really slow growing. So it's really important. You don't want to clear a whole site. You want to try and preserve as much healthy vegetation that's there. Obviously, if a plant is a nuisance or invasive or, causing damage to their foundation, it's a different story, but it's always good to try and preserve existing vegetation. So you don't want to be left with a site that looks like this. And you always want to protect the tree's root systems. So the structural roots are in the top 3 feet. So it's always best to try not to have hardscape under tree canopies. And if you do, use permeable surfaces and or elevated surfaces like decks. So you can use gravel. You can use pavers, but it's not going to be as good as like using gravel or a deck. But at least, if you have some space in between your pavers, like with permeable pavers, it would be better than, having solid concrete. Always try and keep machinery out of the drip lines. So, you don't want to be driving a bobcat over all the roots. And you can always fence those areas off during construction. So typically the best thing under tree canopies are plants or mulch. So we always want to minimize grading. Grading always disturbs soil by altering its natural profile and compacting it. So grade as less as possible. Use cut and fill method. Severe slopes will cause erosion, which is not good. We never want to lose our topsoil. You always want to try and keep your topsoil on site. And if you have to excavate it, you always want to keep it on site and reuse it. The topsoil is where all the nutrients are, and topsoil is taken a long time to form. So you want to keep it on site. It's really good stuff. It's where a lot of the microorganisms are and a lot of the nutrients are. So it's really important to keep your topsoil on site. If you're designing like a house or a pergola or even like something small like a shed, try and put it on level ground. If you can't, you always want to try and put it parallel to contours. On steep sites, you could use a retaining wall. You could also do post and beam construction so you don't have to disturb the soil. So these 2 images are showing contour lines. And so this one, they've placed the house in the flattest area. So when the contour lines are close together, that means it's a steeper slope. When they're further apart, that means it's not as steep. So they've placed this house in the least steep area on the site. And then also another way to minimize grading would be to put all your structures parallel to contour lines. So if you were to put this house going perpendicular to the contour lines, that would require a lot more grading than going parallel to contour lines. Protect surface water. So this is very important. Impervious spaces such as houses, sidewalks, driveways, and concrete can cause runoff issues. So we want to try and reduce runoff as much as possible. We want to protect natural vegetation that are close to waterways. Use vegetation buffers around surface water. Many benefits to that. So it cleans the water, stabilizes the banks, reduces erosion. You always want to check environmental regulations for buffer widths. So, if you're living next to or on a natural waterway and you're working on that area and doing landscaping, you always want to make sure you check with the local regulations about buffer widths and, try not to mess with these natural systems. You can also use rain gardens to improve infiltration. Locate house and other structures or paved areas outside of natural drainage ways. Have as much permeable surfaces as possible. You can also create retention ponds or dry creek beds. So this is a really good link. It's from the Resource Conservation District, and it's Slow It, Sink It, Spread It. And if you copy and paste this link, it's a really good brochure all about best management practices for how to handle stormwater runoff on like a small site, like where your house is. And it's a really great handout. There's a lot of really good ideas in there. So I encourage everybody to open that link and browse through it. And here's what that link looks like. Slow It, Spread It, Sink It, a homeowner's guide to greening stormwater runoff. So this is a really, really good link for homeowners or renters, just about how to deal with stormwater runoff on a small site or a large site. So reduce runoff. So we always want to try to reduce the amount of runoff on our sites. So compacted soil and impervious surfaces increase runoff potential. So reduce impervious surfaces wherever possible. Improve your soil structure. So if you have a healthy, good soil, it's going to absorb more water and let it percolate down through the soil, versus if you have like a really hard compacted soil, you'll have more runoff. Consider doing porous paving or grass pavement, rain gardens, gravel deck, stones with gravel in between, ground covers, permeable pavers. These are all ways to reduce runoff versus just pouring like straight concrete. So rain gardens are a great way to capture the water, and kind of that motto, slow it, sink it, spread it. So it'll capture that water and allow that water to percolate back into the ground. And they're also a really pretty design feature. So they're really nice to have, and visually they can make your yard look really nice. So, they're functional and aesthetic. So this image is showing, all this water on this site. These arrows, that's where the water is draining, and so it's all draining into this rain garden, and then that water can go back into the ground versus running off onto the sidewalk and then going into a storm drain and going into the ocean, and then that fresh water is lost forever. And there's also water, a lot of plants that like these types of like rain gardens. So typically like marsh plants. So those are plants that can handle either dry periods or periods of time where their roots are really soaked with water. So things like juncus, certain grasses, reeds. Here's just some images of some infiltration gardens. Also, people call them dry creek beds. So aesthetically, they're really pretty. So it's a good thing to take advantage of. Also doing rain barrels and gray water are good ways to reuse water on site and reduce stormwater runoff. I had a student in my AutoCAD class, and she has a landscaping company, and she does a lot of gray water systems. So if anybody is interested in that, I can give you her contact. Here's just some images of some permeable pavers. So this image on the left is permeable pavers, and then this is turf block. So another permeable surface. That looks really pretty. So these, you can either do like actual grass or ground cover, or they even make them now with like fake grass already cut to fit in these joints, which is still permeable also. Calstone's a big paving company, and they have a lot of nice permeable pavers. So other ways to protect surface water. So amending your soil to improve organic matter content, to improve infiltration, soil percolation, and soil water holding capacity. So by amending your soil and having good soil, you're going to improve infiltration, percolation, and water holding capacity. So a lot of benefits from that. Also use trees to absorb water from the soil, replenishing the soil's ability to absorb water. So in this image, you can see these tree roots are basically serving like miniature retaining walls everywhere, keeping that soil in place. So if you were to cut down all those trees, you'd probably have a really bad erosion problem. Another image about protecting surface water. So this is just showing the placement of this house. So we always want to avoid placing structures in natural waterways and drainage ways. You know, even if it's like a little stream that barely ever is running, you know, nowadays you never know what's going to happen. So it's always really important to keep things out of natural waterways and drainage ways. So they're saying this is the drainage way. So you wouldn't want to put a house here, whereas this is a much better site for a house. This image is showing ways that you can create buffers to help protect water bodies and wetlands. So this one's just showing like if you had a lawn or a meadow, you know, you want to have some buffers in between this wetland so that if you're using fertilizers or pesticides, it's going to get filtered out. So using an herbaceous edge and then a woodland edge and then a woodland and then have your wetland. This one's showing the pollution source from the house, probably also a lawn, and it's showing this would be draining down into this water body. So you would need to have a buffer to help filter out some of those pollutants. Okay, maintaining wildlife habitat. So this is always really important. So it's always good to provide a diversity of habitats and also trying to retain natural habitats. So with your plants, it's good to have a variety of heights. Diversity is essential for a healthy ecosystem. Always try to connect habitats within the site to promote species diversity. General rule of thumb, more diversity, less disease and plant stress. So kind of like the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if you have all the same plant and then you get, say, a pest or disease that attacks that plant, then they're all going to be, you know, disadvantaged from that. Whereas if you had a lot of different plants, then, you know, those ones would die, but your other plants would be healthy. So, you know, we see this a lot of like the same plant used multiple times in a lot of modern designs. And, you know, modern designs have become more popular nowadays. But, you know, there's so many great plants out there, and it is important to provide some biodiversity for our native birds and butterflies and insects. So, you know, it's just some things to think about. Also, fragmented and isolated habitats should be avoided. Site restoration. So you always want to try and restore a site. So the principle is a flawed residential site should be restored to a healthy environment. So many sites have already been severely altered before the design begins. True nature has long been absent in most cases, but we can still create habitat and biodiversity. Typically, most damaged sites are new housing developments or old ag lands. So a lot of times with these new housing developments, they scrape off all the topsoil and then they build the homes and you're left with like hard like bedrock or like clay or sand. So I see this a lot and it's really, really sad. And it's, you know, they build all these homes and these people have these just blank barren land backyards with horrible soil. So you can restore it. It's going to take some work. Also old ag land. So a lot of old ag land has tons of like chemicals in the soil. So, you know, if you are living on old ag land, you might want to think about getting it tested and see, you know, what's in there and how you can deal with that. Less obvious altered landscapes, you know, lawn treated with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Leaf blowers for many years, you know, the leaf blowers are horrible just because they blow away all your good topsoil and leave you with, you know, bad soil and no mulch or anything. You know, it's hard to restore to its original state, but you can create a healthy landscape. So the best way is to restore it. First, problems and inappropriate materials should be removed. And then second, redesign the site in a sustainable way. Rehabilitate the soil. So the soil on many sites can be lacking in topsoil, can be compacted, infertile, or contain pollutions such as lead, oil, pesticides, and so on. So you can get your soil tested. You can test the pH, organic matter content, and the nutrients, and then amend it as necessary. So there's a few good labs around. There's Perry Laboratories, and I believe there's another one in Watsonville. You can also buy like home testing kits, like the Lamont soil testing kit. So, you know, having healthy soil is extremely, extremely important. So if you have healthy soil, you're going to have healthy plants. You're not going to have to do as much stuff to your plants. And so soil health is so important. Can't stress it enough. There's also, if you want to find out more about your soil, there's different soil apps. There's the soil information from the county that we saw in class, through the planning departments or through GIS. There's also this link I have here, this web soil survey, and you can go on to that and actually put your address in, and it will come up with what type of soil you have. Typically, if you want to improve your soil, compost is the best way. So whether your soil has too much clay or too much sand, compost is the best way to fix both of those issues. So 2 to 4 inches of compost for every 6 to 8 inches of soil is commonly recommended. And by adding compost, you can improve your soil aggregation, infiltration, percolation, nutrient holding capacity, water holding capacity, and soil biology. So you're improving a lot just by adding compost. Soiling organisms in compost break down pollutants and tie up heavy metals. Amending existing soil has environmental benefits over hauling in topsoil. So there's also like those soil pyramid charts, so you can figure out what kind of soil you have at home, which is really helpful. So discard toxic materials. Construction debris can contain paints, glues, and solvents. Lead levels may be high around old homes due to use of lead paint. Also, pressure-treated wood before 2003 is a toxic material. Contains chromated copper arsenic. So if you have it and you can't remove use an oil-based penetrating stain to help seal in the chemicals. So removing toxic material in the correct way, you want to contact the EPA or municipal health offices. But so many of our construction materials and even landscaping materials are toxic. So it's pretty sad, really. Remove unsuitable vegetation. So unhealthy vegetation that's diseased or dying, it's always good to get rid of it before it spreads to your healthy plants. Plants that need too much water are never good to have nowadays, or if they're put in the wrong location, and or invasive. So we always want to get rid of invasive plants, and we never want to use them in a design, especially if it's in a natural area where it can escape your backyard. I mean, I wouldn't use it either way, because, you know, birds eat the seeds, or it can blow in the wind, or it can carry away in the water and spread. But, you know, especially if you live in a natural area where you're not bordered off by a fence, it's really, really important to not use any invasive plants. So things like acacias, eucalyptus, Algerian ivy, pampas grass, running bamboo, equisetum, vinca, mint, feathergrass, and pennisetum grass. And there are many others too. Okay, and so this slide is actually where the Sustainable Design Part 2 starts. So this is the end of this slideshow, and all this other material is in the Sustainable Design Part 2 with audio.